Hello all. I am Paramveer from ISC to Delhi NCR chapter, and today we have our speaker named Mr. Manu Gupta. He is a cybersecurity professional specializing in identity governance and large-scale IAM transformations. He has led cyber risk programs across industries uh, through global consulting engagements. With hands-on experience across leading IAM and cloud platforms, he holds a computer science engineering degree and has completed a management program from IIM Calcutta. He is currently working on AI solutions, engineering, and how AI can introduce efficiency to identity security programs. He brings a security-first architecture-driven perspective. Over to you, Mr. Manu. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for signing up and then actually joining this webinar. I am Manu, and I'm working at the intersection of identity, security, governance, and artificial intelligence. Now, before we dive in, let me set the stage because I understand that we have a diverse audience, ranging from CISOs, security engineers, probably a few students who are preparing for their CISSP and practitioner across the board for that matter. So I will do a quick refresher. What is identity and access management? At its simplest, it means who are you, what can you do, and what you should be allowed to, right? कौन है, क्या access है और क्यों है? And that's IAM. Every time somebody badges into their office, every time you log into your email, and every time an API call hits your cloud environment, there's an identity behind it. And someone somewhere decided what that identity is allowed to do. And that's where it gets interesting because organizations need to periodically verify all that access, whether that is still appropriate or not. And that is what we call as access certification. Essentially, a manager or a system owner, right, is asked to review who has access to what and confirm that yes, this person still needs it. Think of it as an audit कि घर की चाबी किसके पास है and क्या उसी के पास होनी चाहिए. And that's one of the key parts of IAM, right? And that brings me to a question for you to ponder upon. If your organization discovers tomorrow that a former employee still had access to a sensitive production system 6 months after leaving, would that be surprising or would you think, yes, that makes sense? If that second reaction feels familiar or you think, yes, that sounds about right, then you're at the right place because that's why we are going to talk about why this keeps happening and what AI is starting to do about it. So here's our journey for today. We'll start with why identity has become the new perimeter. Then we'll look at the cracks in how organizations govern identity today, specifically role models. Then we'll get into the modern challenges, SaaS sprawl, non-human identities, the things that make this harder every year. Then how AI is both a solution and a new risk. We'll talk about governance programs, why they struggle at the leadership level. And then, if time permits, we'll tie it back all to the CISSP domains. And then we can open it for questions. Nevertheless, during the course of this talk, if there are questions, feel free to drop it in chat and we can discuss them. So, for decades, security was built around network, be it firewalls, demilitarized zones like we call DMZs or VPNs. Basically, there was a castle and a moat model. And the assumption was simple that everything is inside that perimeter is trusted and everything outside is not. Now that model is no longer there and it didn't go away, quietly. It was dismantled and gradually by cloud computing, SaaS adoption, remote work or mobile devices. as we also briefly touched about this in our physical meet. Sandeep sir talked about it. Today, our applications are in AWS, Azure, GCP. Our data is in Salesforce, maybe Google Workspace. The employees are in some coffee shops in Delhi, in Bangalore, in some co-working spaces in Hyderabad, in some home offices in Maharashtra. So there is no perimeter to defend now. So what is essentially left is identity. And your identity is now that common thread that is across every system, every application, and most access decisions. Whether a human logs into a SAP system or an API key authenticates to a microservice, it all starts with an identity. According to reports, the vast majority of data breaches estimates put it above 80%, which involve compromised credentials or identity related attack vectors. Phishing, credential stuffing, privilege escalation, session hijacking, these are all different types of identity attacks. So let me give you two real world examples. Maybe some of you are already aware about them. The first example is about a social media incident where in 2020, a media company's official social media account was compromised. The attacker posted offensive content across multiple platforms. And how did this happen? It came down to how credentials were shared and managed across that social media platform. Now, multiple people had access through those shared accounts. There was no proper identity governance. And who could post on behalf of one of world's most recognizable brands, right? There was no governance around it. So this wasn't a zero-day exploit. It was a failure of identity governance, specifically around how credentials are shared, lack of any individual accountability, and no access certification. And the damage was huge because it was reputational, immediate, and global. In our second example, which is slightly more famous than this, is involves a hospitality company. So in 2018, a company disclosed one of the largest data breaches in history. Approximately 500 million records were compromised. So company A had acquired company B in 2016. During and after that acquisition, company B's legacy systems, accounts, and access rights were not reviewed, not commissioned, right? Attackers in company B's network were there in the network since 2014, 2 years before the acquisition. Um, there were orphaned accounts, unreviewed access rights. There was no continuous monitoring of who is accessing what. And when company B's systems were inherited by company A, they eventually inherited that debt as well, that identity debt. There were no proper joiner mover processes to the acquired systems. No access certification happened on the legacy accounts, and privilege creep was there, right? And this is the reality we are living in, that identity is not just about a checkbox on your compliance program. It is the control plane through which attackers move laterally, right? They escalate privileges, they exfiltrate data. And in India, these are very relevant because India's digital transformation is one of the most aggressive in the world, with UPI processing billions of transactions, Aadhaar linked services touching over a billion identities, and India and enterprises adopting cloud first strategies at an unprecedented pace. The attack surface is massive and growing every day. Now, most organizations don't start from zero. They have some identity governance programs. They have invested in tools, they run access certification, they have user life cycle, yet such incidents keep happening because traditional IGA was designed for a world that's changing now, right? So let's start with JML, joiner, mover, lever model, or what we call as the identity lifecycle. uh, that that backbone of identity lifecycle is 20 years old. So when someone joins the organization, they get provisioned, right? What we call as birthright or their zero-day access. And when they move to a new role, like you got promoted, you moved to a different department, your access gets updated. And when you leave, your access is revoked, right? It is really simple in theory, but when you do it on ground, it becomes difficult because in the SaaS world, people don't just have access to three or four, on-premise or systems. It's not just any, you know, you'll get access to Active Directory and that's it, right? Nowadays, a typical enterprise touches around 30 to 50 SaaS applications, because a developer may have accounts in AWS, Azure, GitHub, Jenkins, multiple databases, and a lot of internal tools, right? And when the developer moves from one department to another, their old access does not always get revoked, right? And that's the challenge. So that old role stays. The access to GitHub repository, still lingers on. The Jenkins pipeline credentials still remain active, and this is privilege creep, and it keeps happening at scale in every organization. Then the second problem is role explosion. Traditional RBAC, role-based access control, right, as we call it, RBAC, worked well when the role count was not too high, right? Maybe a few hundred roles were good enough, but when we are managing access across hundreds of SaaS applications, and all of them have their own entitlement or own access model, right? Companies can end up with thousands of roles, sometimes even 10 thousands of roles. I've seen one IT services company with over 41,000 roles, with just 100,000 employees, right? At that scale, roles stop being that meaningful and they just become noise. And then there's a deeper problem, right? IGA programs are more compliance driven. They are less risk driven. The typical motivation of implementing identity governance is an audit finding or a regulatory requirement, which is why we saw a huge influx of these engagements post COVID, because everybody was, asked to work from home, and there were strong requirements around that we need to do quarterly access review because the auditor said so. So what happens, right? Managers got a spreadsheet, and I mean, that spreadsheet was generally hosted on a portal if they were too lucky, and there were a lot of access entries. Now they don't understand half of the entitlements, right? They don't have a context of that, why that particular role is required, what it does, right? And they are doing all that above of their actual day job, right? So what would you do? You just do approve all, and that is called rubber stamping. And that's really the secret of access certification and why it's no longer working out. And the struggle does not just end there. Now this is the problem, that companies adopt a tool first mindset. I mean, they think that they buy an IGA platform, an IGA product, and then they expect that it solves that identity governance problem. But a tool without architecture doesn't really do anything, right? You need a robust governance architecture and processes with a clear model of how the identities are managed, how the access decisions are made, how that risk is assessed, right? And how those policies are enforced. Without that, we are just trying to automate a broken process. And to quote one example, I mean, a lot of times when we set up a tool, when we build some processes, the first question that that employees ask is, okay, we used to do that in that way on that model. Now, how do we do that process here, right? How do I copy access? And the answer is that it is not a new interface to do same things. It is a new process, and there is a new architecture now. And that change adoption is a little difficult, right? Which is why there are workarounds, sometimes patchy work, which proves these projects to be ineffective. And with that, the challenges grow even further, right? So let me walk you through this landscape. The average, mid-size enterprise today can have somewhere between 200 to 400 SaaS apps, and most of these are adopted by business units without IT or security involvement. Now, marketing can sign a new analytics tool. Sales can, adopt a new, forecasting platform. HR starts using a new survey tool, and each of these create different identity silos. Accounts that are outside the purview of your main IGA program. These are nothing but shadow identities, and they are invisible to the security team. In Indian context, this is amplified by the pace of digital adoption, as we talked about earlier. Startups are adopting SaaS at a rate that often outpaces the ability to govern them. And I've seen organizations where even CISO didn't know that a business critical application or a database was hosted on a SaaS platform procured by a regional sales team, and that happens more often than not. Then we have non-human identities, right? This is the challenge that is keeping all of us up at night. For every human identity in your organization, companies now have around 10 to 50 non-human identities. These are service accounts, API keys, OAuth tokens, certificates, machine identities, etc. And these identities will have elevated privileges, and they rarely expire, right? They are almost never included in the access certification campaign, and which is why these are the prime target for any attacker, right? I mean, just think about it, that when was the last time when somebody reviewed the permissions on your CI/CD pipeline, or audited the API key to the production database, or checked whether the OAuth token that was issued 2 years ago is still in use, right? Because we follow that policy: if it's working, don't touch it, right? Second problem is orphan accounts, right? The when employees leave or contractors leave, which happens more often than employees, their accounts in these SaaS platforms or cloud environments often remain as is. These orphan accounts are stale but active, and they are a gift to these attackers. In the hospitality chain case that we discussed, case two, this was exactly the pattern, right? Legacy accounts from an acquired entity became the entry point for a multi-year intrusion, right? They came in 2014, then they finally break through on 2016, and they were identified in 2018. And then finally, the shift to DevOps and infrastructure as a code, Terraform, it has created a new category of identity challenges. Developers need, broad access to build and deploy. Cloud IAM policies in Azure, AWS, GCP can be very complex, granular, and often over permissive, because it's always easier to give full access rather than following the concept of least privilege, which basically states that give them only what access is required for them to do their jobs. But what we have seen is that that's not followed that in practice, and the result is that your cloud identities are basically over privileged, and they are the paths for that lateral movement, resulting in a breach that we talked in our opening session. Now, where maybe a lot of you may be interested, that how AI is entering this picture, right? It's a powerful utility, and it also adds a new risk. So AI in identity governance is not fiction, right? It's not a POC anymore. It's being deployed today in production systems by all the leading cloud vendors, and by organizations who are building custom solutions. So I'll just show you some key applications. The first goes back to RBAC, so AI powered role mining, because traditionally when we did role engineering, it was manual, it was expensive, and it was very frustrating. By the time you actually created a role model, you would have either changed the landscape, added a lot of new applications, and it was difficult, right? You basically sit in workshops with all the business stakeholders and you try to define these roles. It used to take months, right? Even years at time. And the results were obviously outdated, right? Now AI changes that fundamentally, because these machine learning algorithms can actually analyze these access patterns across the organization, right? Who has access to what, who actually uses it, right? So assignment is one, but use is actually, who is actually using it, right? And they create these clusters, right? And then those clusters became your candidates for roles, and then algorithms can even identify the outliers, right? I mean, this is a game changer for at least Indian IT companies who have large enterprises. And I mean, instead of trying to define roles manually, they can actually use their data to actually create those access patterns and identify those access patterns using machine learning. Second is anomaly detection. So, I mean, this is where AI shines through. So by establishing a baseline access patterns for individuals or maybe groups of people, learning model can detect deviations that can indicate some sort of a compromise, some sort of a threat, or any type of a policy violation. So for example, a user who accesses three applications during business hours suddenly starts accessing a financial application at 2 a.m. from a unusual location, right? So a traditional rule-based system may not be able to identify that, right? However, an AI model that is trained on these patterns will flag that as an anomaly. And this is particularly valuable in the IT services context, where you have a large workforces who are accessing client systems, and there is a risk of credential sharing or unauthorized access, right? Then we have predictive access scoring. So instead of treating all the accesses equally, AI can assign risk scores based on multiple factors. The sensitivity of the resource, what is that user's function, their role, what is their historical access pattern, right? And based on that, whether they should have that access or not. And then this also sets the foundation for risk based access certification, where you get that input. So instead of asking a manager or a system owner like we discussed earlier, rather than them managing those 450 access entries, they can only look at the high risk ones, and the low risk ones are approved in during your short term cycle. So there is generally a quarter cycle, and then there is certification of access around the clock, sorry, around the year, right? So that could be used here. And then there could be AI generated policy recommendations. So AI can basically analyze the existing policies, compare them with your actual access usage, and then recommend changes to those policies, right? It can identify policies that are either too permissive, it can suggest different constraints, or even draft new policies or for new applications based on your environmental data. I see there is a question. Let me see. How do I open questions? Okay. So Shikhar is asking that can AI integration be done with ZTA? Uh, sure, and they can complement each other, right? So, I mean, zero trust basically is never trust, right? So there can be multiple integration points, right? You can have continuous authentication. So AI can analyze these behavioral signals, right? Typing pattern or access time or location, and continuously validate your identity, not just at login, right? And then there could be dynamic policy enforcement, right? Instead of your static rules, AI can make access decisions in real time. So if a user is logging to a new device at at 12, then it can step up authentication, and this is what Apple does actually. So if you try to reset your Apple account password from your home, it will directly let you reset it using your phone password. But if you're in a different network at a different location, then it gives you a cooling off period of 1 hour and then asks you for some additional questions. Then there could be least privilege. So AI can recommend tightening of access based on usage pattern, right? So in case of zero trust, the identity is at the center of that architecture, and AI will help you make decisions faster. It'll add more contextual knowledge and try to add precision to those access decisions, right? So I think that, I mean, we have been talking about Indian IT enterprises, so AI is absolutely a necessity given the scale of digital identities that are involved. So, Shikhar, I hope that answers your question. Okay. Now, obviously, it's everything is a boon or a bane as we learned in school. So here's where we need to be, careful. So AI in this landscape can obviously introduce a lot of risks. The first problem, obviously, we all know is bias. If your historical access data reflects some biased access decision, let's say that some groups were denied, uh, basically denied for career development tools, or certain roles were historically overprivileged, then AI basically learns from those and will always continue those biases. So that's one. Second is explainability. So when an AI model denies an access request or flags an anomaly, can it explain why, right? And according to these India regulations, right, especially DPDP, we require the automated decisions to be explainable, right? A black box making decisions is a compliance risk. Then we talk about manipulation. So sophisticated attackers can learn to operate within the normal patterns that AI models expect, right? So attackers will also get smarter and slowly escalate their access in ways that stay below that level, right? And then overlines, that is basically biggest risk of AI, that AI should augment human decision making and identity governance, not replace it. Earlier we used to call it humans in loop. Some organizations are now calling it human in lead. Is essential, especially for high risk decisions, right? Because an AI system cannot be held accountable. And here is the newest frontier, and we talked about it, or heard some conversation around it in the in-person event that we did. So AI agents are the new frontier, and they are actually identities. And as organizations are deploying AI agents left, right, and center, autonomous software that can browse the web, write code, access databases, send mails. Each of these agents is an identity that needs to be governed. What access does that AI agent have? Who authorized it? Is it following POLP, privilege of least principle of least privilege? What happens when it is compromised, right? This is not a theoretical concern. Organizations are already deploying AI agents that have access to production systems and customer data, right? So if we don't govern them, then AI agent identities the same way, if not more rigorously, should govern like we govern human identities. And what we are doing is basically creating a attack surface, right? So I mean, think if you wouldn't give a new intern, right, an unrestricted access to a production database, why would you give the same access to AI agent without any governance controls, right? So that's the food for thought for today. Now, let's talk about what goes wrong at the organizational level. Now, I've been doing this for some time now, and a lot of these are my observations, or that's my opinion. But just a second. Okay. I hope my screen is still visible. Mm, Can somebody confirm? Sane, are you there?
Tell me. Hi, Manu.
Yeah, yeah. Is my screen still visible? I saw
Yes,
some
yes,
prompt.
visible, visible.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you. Um, okay, so what I was saying was that a lot of these are my observations. A lot of these are, what I have seen through the time. So, this is what my observations are in terms of what goes wrong at the organizational level. In theory, access certifications are a critical control. Uh, Periodically, managers review their team members' access and confirm that each entitlement is still appropriate. In practice, this is where identity governance struggles, because the problem is multifaceted now. First, volume. A manager with a team of 15 people, each with access of 0 to those 50 applications, is being asked to review those 400, 500 access entries, right? And multiply that by quarterly reviews, you have a manager that is spending days on a task they either don't understand properly or they don't have that context, right? Second is lack of context. The manager sees an entitlement, something like data pipeline execution role, right? Or prod data execution role, AWS, right? Do they know what they mean? Maybe to some extent, right? But do they know that if it is still appropriate, they may not have a good idea. So they approve it because revoking it might break something, right? And no one wants to be that person who caused a production outage, because if it is working, then why touch it, right? Third is rubber stamping, as we talked about earlier, and the fix is basically a combination, right? You basically bake in risk-based certifications using AI, which we earlier discussed. There can be a concept of micro certifications that focus only on the changes, right? And we have done this for a client recently, right? Rather than looking at everything, only that delta, right? There could be peer comparison that identify what are the access outliers, and then most importantly, the accountability mechanisms that measure the quality of reviews, not just their completion, right? It's easier said than done, but when you create that multi-layer strategy and when you try to bake in those multiple approaches, you basically try to fix that problem, right? Now, one of the more common mistakes that I've seen is this, that identity governance um, is identified as an IT project, right? It's not, right? It's a capability. It's a business capability. The business owns the data. The business owns the access decisions, and business should also own governing them, right? When identity governance is just an IT initiative, it becomes disconnected from the business context and business risk. Where the executive leadership generally gets it wrong is many CXOs that I've spoken with generally make three mistakes. And one is they equate an IGA tool deployment with identity governance maturity. So subscribing to a product, licensing a product doesn't make you mature, right? Second, you underinvest in identity architecture and overinvest in tooling, right? So you need to invest in the architecture and building those processes. Make sure that adoption is there, that change management is there, right? And it takes investment. And then third is that you just treat identity as a compliance problem rather than very much a security architectural problem, which it is, right? So these are some of the common things that we have seen amongst other things. And how do you actually measure? So how do you measure success, right? So this is the issues that we have seen at hand. But how do you really measure success? So if you are measuring your identity governance program by the number of certifications completed or the percentage of reviews done on time, you are measuring activity, not outcomes. The right metrics are, and there could be more, right? Percentage of access that follows least privilege, mean time to detect and revoke, mean time to detect and revoking that inappropriate access, percentage of orphan accounts, non-human identity governance, coverage, and risk reduction over time. So you basically use all that, create your metrics, your benchmark, and then you basically use those to reduce a risk over time, right? And okay, I see question again. Okay, thank you, Pankaj and Alam. Right. This is essentially, what we have from uh, 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 a success standpoint. Now, what I'm going to do is, as we are doing this as part of ISC2, uh, and I know some of you are also preparing for your CISSP, I want to tie it back to different CISSP domains, right? Um, I'll take a brief pause before that and see if anybody has any questions, or if you need any, if you want me to go over any specific section. you can add your Q&A in the chat. I'll wait for a minute and then I'll continue. Okay, I will continue. So, for my fellow practitioners who are preparing for CISSP or who have already completed, just a refresher for them. I'll try to map how this entire discussion basically goes back to the domains, right? So, domain one for CISSP is security and risk management. Everything we discussed about risk-based identity governance, risk scoring, measuring governance effectiveness, these all tie to domain one. Identity risk is a subset of organizational risk, and it needs to be managed with the same rigor that we apply to any other risk category. AI governance in identity systems is also domain one because there are concern about ethical use, bias, transparency, accountability, right? Then we have our domain three, which is security architecture and engineering. The shift from tool first mindset to architecture and process plus mindset, or that architectural plus process first thinking, is our domain three. Uh, Designing identity governance architectures that can handle cloud, all your SaaS applications, non-human identities, AI agents require similar architectural discipline that we apply to network and application security. So, zero trust architecture, which puts identity at its core, is fundamentally a domain three topic. Then, domain five, identity and access management. This is obvious. So, but I'll push beyond the basics. So, domain five isn't just about authentication and authorization. It's about identity lifecycle management, provisioning, access review, certifications, governance, all the topics that we covered today. The CISSP curriculum's treatment of IAM needs to evolve to address non-human identities and AI agent identities and cloud native IAM as well. But that's where it should be placed. And then domain seven is security operations. This covers anomaly detection, continuous monitoring, incident response, involving any identity compromise, all domain 7, right? uh, the operationalization of identity governance, running certification campaigns, the access review campaigns, right? Monitoring privilege creep, detecting orphan accounts, these are essentially security operations function. AI powered monitoring of AI, AI monitoring of identity events is sort of a future of these security operations. The point here is that modern identity governance is not a niche topic. It cuts across the CISSP common body of knowledge, and it's a foundational security discipline that touches risk, architecture, access management, as well as operations, right? So, uh, these are some of the key takeaways. So we talked about a lot of things, but I'll just try to summarize that in interest of everybody's takeaways. So, one, identity is not just an IT problem, right? It's a security architecture issue that requires that same strategic attention as any other critical security domain, right? Two, governance is greater than tooling. No tool will only save you if your governance model, your processes, and your organizational accountability is broken. Three, AI is a powerful enabler for identity governance, be it role mining, anomaly detection, risk scoring. We saw different applications and we talked about it, right? But it needs guardrails, bias, explainability, uh, and all these adversarial risks are very much real, right? And they need to be managed, which is, a little bit what you used to call future is now. So getting into all of that is also a good time, right? Human in lead concept is very much, or humans in loop concept is very much real. Fourth, continuous over periodic, right? The days of quarterly reviewing access as your primary governance mechanism, those days are numbered, right? The future is continuous monitoring, real time risk assessment, and dynamic request workflows or dynamic access decisions. As Shikhar asked on the chat, right? How can we integrate AI with the zero trust architecture? So, AI can help you keep it continuous, right? It can add that dynamism to what used to be a static equation. Five, finally, non-human identities. So these AI agents and non-human identities are the next frontier. If our governance program doesn't cover service accounts, API keys, and AI agents and doesn't treat them as identities, right? Then that creates a massive blind spot. So I'll probably close with this thought that we are living in a time of extraordinary transformation. AI, artificial intelligence, is shaping every industry, every function, every process. And in this world, the question is not whether your identities will be targeted. They will. The question is whether your governance is strong enough to withstand that targeting. In 2016 and beyond, identity governance is not just about compliance, it's about survivability. And with that, I'll conclude and I'll open the floor for any questions, discussions, feedback. So those QR codes are my LinkedIn. I'm generally very active on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer your questions even after. The other day, Colonel Joshi talked about how DPO is opening a lot of frontier in terms of new opportunities, right? Basically growing in the industry. Identity security is also another important vertical or frontier where if you're looking for growth opportunities, if you're trying to transition, if you're trying to identify new opportunities, there are a lot of openings in that domain as well. Obviously, as the frontier is growing, the application count is growing. These creating that mindset, building those processes, not just doing tool implementation. If you have that, if you come with that mindset, obviously there are a lot of opportunities that await you, right? And I'm happy to help you in whatever capacity I can, because as ISC2 says, I want to advance the profession. I want to help my fellow colleagues in whatever capacity I can. And I'm happy to help you in whatever capacity with referrals, with knowledge, with guidance, whatever I can, or connect you to the right people in case there is, I reach my limit of knowledge, information, or network for that matter. But with that, okay, I see there is one question. Okay, no, these are just comments. But yeah, so I mean, that's what we had for now. But if there's anything, I'm here to answer.